meeting started. I want to thank everybody on this Friday afternoon taking time to again meet and discuss the Future Bridge Traffic Impact Study that we have going on. We will do a roll call, and I'll call out your name, and if you just again say here, and then also comment on what group you're here representing. We do have a new gentleman here in place of the Reinhardt Township, and he'll introduce himself and kind of give us a background of him, but that way he'll have an idea of who the rest of you are here representing. So with that, I'll just go over on the list and call out your name again as they appear on the list. Eric Hansen.
Yep, here. I'm representing the 32nd Avenue neighborhood.
Zach Bolt.
Here. I'm representing the Reinhardt neighborhood, East Grand Forks.
Chris Arnold.
Which is on.
You don't need to do the switches.
Oh, perfect.
It's
Chris Arnold, Grand Forks Public Schools.
Brian Larson.
Here, representing East Grand Forks City Council.
Tanya Kuntz.
Here, ELKS Drive, Grand Forks.
Chris Wald. Oh, Craig Wald, I'm sorry.
Here, representing Big Glen neighborhood of East Grand Forks.
Sorry, Craig.
Oh, that's fine.
Dave Zavarro.
Present, here representing the East Grand Forks Business Chamber of Commerce.
Andrew Butke.
Here, I live on the near south side of Grand Forks.
Josh Brown.
Here, representing the Grand Forks side of the Chamber of Commerce.
And then Tim Brooks.
Tim Brooks, representing Reinhardt Township, sitting in for John Zavril today. So.
Yep, and then John has provided you with all of the materials for today and stuff.
Yep.
Good. And then online we have our project team from Aligned Engineering. And I'll wait to do introductions and they can introduce themselves actually. As you are aware, we do have this recorded. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Earl, I'm just not sure if I'm supposed to be checked in that I was present or not.
Oh.
Yeah. I saw that I wasn't on here, but I just assumed maybe it was.
We don't have your name down either.
Yeah.
Well.
I'll take off then.
No. That's another.
Is that Kyle?
Yeah.
Kyle Kwame, are you here?
Yes.
And you represent?
Ward 5, Grand Forks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were on my list. Mark's not here, so I was going to ask. I'm glad you're here.
So, yes, thanks. As you are aware, we also have this live streamed on both cities' Facebook, both cities' local access channels. Also, it'll be available on YouTube afterwards. So again, as you go back to your neighborhoods and your constituency, you can allow them or remind them how they can re-view this video and all the past videos as well on the website. And I believe, I'm sorry, was that someone online?
No, that was me, sorry.
Oh, okay. We do have an agenda. We are going to conclude by 2. That's our promise to you. We do know that we have one person who will have to leave early, and that's just fine. If you do have to get up and go prior to 2 o'clock, that's absolutely understandable. And then you also have the recording to play back and catch up anything that you may have missed in the discussion. But we do ask you that prior to you leaving, make sure that you if you have any questions or comments, that you make them known to us while you're still here. But if you think of something afterwards, feel free to email and get back to us those comments as well. So with that, I think the agenda is set. I'll stop sharing my screen and let Tim share his and go us through the materials.
Sounds good. Just waiting for the permission to flip over. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. glad to be here again. I was more glad to be there in person last meeting. That was really a nice treat to meet with people face to face and get to see you more than just on screen. So appreciate that, but glad to be here regardless. And I did get a nice tour and saw some things I hadn't seen before with EARL after the meeting last time, so that was also helpful. And I do want to add to EARL's thanks for being here and taking time for this. I know you all have lots of other things to do and that you might prefer to do, and your time is really valuable to sort of the two-way communication so you can hear what we're finding and so we can hear what your reactions are. So thanks again, and agreed on getting done by 2 o'clock. We have plenty to talk about, and so we'll go through slides. I do want to make some time at the end just to do a round robin to sort of check in with each of you and ask for additional comments or questions or kind of what you're hearing on the streets. No pun intended. So let's see. Okay, agenda as it is, mostly give a recap of the public open house and then get into the traffic information, which you've seen in the memo that was already sent around. And so as usual, I just do this to review and share where we are. Here we are in September, headed toward being concluded with everything by December. I think we're in a good place, but plenty of work to be done, and including our evaluation and sharing those results that kind of wraps things up and heads us toward next steps. This list you can just refer to if you want to. It just keeps track of our consultant deliverables and what we're working on. So we'll talk about the future traffic for the 2 bridge options and the no build, and then as I just mentioned, where we're headed after this. Sort of soon after this is putting together that direct comparison evaluation and some graphics to really kind of pull everything together to see what we've got with the different options. So that's probably the moment we've all been waiting for, but today it gives a preview of what we're seeing in the traffic results. So public open house, recap that, kind of what we did and what we heard. The purpose, as I think you know, just make sure people are aware of the study, and then specifically share what we call the purpose and need, essentially why we're doing it, what the needs are, and sort of that future traffic and safety information without the project, what we call the no build, and then get input on both of those items. Recap, we did some everything we could to make people aware of the project and the opportunity to participate, sort of paper and electronic notices and use of our project-specific website. We also did a live presentation. I know a couple of you were there, which I appreciate. This was back in July, which already seems like a long time ago. And then that was also live streamed, and the presentation was shared on the website, and the website, we kept that open for 3 weeks for public comment. So here's a summary of kind of the online traffic. That live online presentation was disappointing in terms of numbers of people. We only had 13 people join. And if you take out a couple of you, not a lot of sort of general public that we would hope to reach. I'm not sure that's a failure necessarily of our efforts. It's a lot to ask people to sort of get online and listen to a meeting. We only had more success in getting people to the website. As you can see in this table, we generated a lot of new visitors. If you kind of look, we are keeping track since we started on the project how many people have visited the site. So we picked up, upwards of 3,000 visitors. We do separate whether those are brand new or returning. Both are good. So really, we know a lot of people saw the information, which is good. We did try to get people to complete a survey and to provide comments on the map. Still got several hundred survey responses, fewer of the specific map comments that was focused on the school issues. So again, not necessarily unusual, and I think a reasonable result with really the real success was just getting the several thousand people that we know viewed the information. And specifically the recording, we are able to track the number of people that access that, and we had 50 people that view the recording. Again, that's not for everybody. It takes some time to look at that, so don't expect huge numbers there. So that recaps kind of the how many, and then delving into what we've heard. The live event, again, there were not a lot of people, but the conversation was really on understanding just what we had done as we shared that traffic forecasting information, questions about that, safety, a couple of people asking about Merrifield and how that bridge does or doesn't relate to the study. And then in terms of a geographic focus, comments on 32nd Avenue, questions about increased traffic, school crossing safety, and then sort of how that would change, how increased traffic would change people's experience on getting in and out of the driveways or accessing properties. If we look to the online comments, a little bit more there to digest. So we just asked people, what are your priorities as a way to validate and verify what we think they are or how the study is taking shape. So across the bottom of the screen are the categories we asked people about. You know, is your priority traffic, safety, bikes and peds, schools, environment, something else? You can see a kind of a distribution between all of those. Traffic, probably our highest rank, traffic and safety, not surprising. At the end, the very last bar that goes up to the top was asking people, is your priority something else? Of the people that said it was something else, 40 wrote in a comment to tell us what that was. And you see those bulleted here down the left, including sort of more specifics than what we asked, you know, concerned about impact on neighborhood character, quality of life, property values. Those are sort of the concern category. On the flip side, people's priority was an added river crossing option related to flooding or related to convenience and sort of being able to get across the river. So I think this was helpful and affirming in terms of the big picture priorities, and then also helpful to get those individual comments. On the next screen here, we asked people for reaction on the purpose and need. Really, you know, why are we doing the project? What are those specific needs? We had 264 responses, 181 of those with comments, which is a nice number to be able to kind of filter through and think about. So you see on the bar chart, the biggest comment, happy to say, was strongly agree with the project purpose and need. But you do see we get some others in agree, neutral, disagree, and certainly a decent number in the strongly disagree that we want to pay attention to. So if you're looking at the bullets on the left, as we kind of pull out themes from those who said they strongly agree with our purpose and need, those comments were agreeing with or sort of supporting comments, the added convenience of an additional bridge, sort of the better distribution of traffic throughout the systems that would come with another bridge, and the fact that both cities are growing, and this sort of supports the planned growth in East Grand Forks. Strongly disagree. People felt New Bridge would only benefit East Grand Forks, that there would be negative impacts on 32nd Avenue in Grand Forks, that their preference would be for the bridge farther south at Merrifield, or concerns about increased traffic around schools. From my perspective, none of those issues were new, either agree or disagree, but helpful just to hear them and see where people are coming from. The one other thing while I blast through this, that we did ask. We inserted this comment map specifically to capture concerns around schools in the study area, with the caveat that that's an issue anyway, regardless of building a new bridge. It's an issue today and would be expected to be a concern in the future with or without a new bridge, just as traffic grows in the area and pick up and drop off and traffic flowing adjacent to schools. We did not get a lot of comment on that, specifically 32 respondents with 48 total comments. We always do a screen just to make sure on any of these comments no one is just submitting multiple comments, and they are limited to that with the software, so we didn't see any issues like that. The other thing that happens, if you looked at the website, you can provide a comment, but then you can also do a like or dislike to other people's comments, which is a way for somebody to come in. They may not provide a new comment, but like, yes, yes, no, no. So I appreciate seeing that engagement of the likes and dislikes, which just indicates more people were there looking at the information and thinking about it than the ones who actually put in a specific comment. So pulling out the themes, if you see the three colors on the map, we asked, say, hey, do you have a comment about something that exists today, comment about the ELKS option, or a comment about the 30-second option? Under the existing question, not related to a bridge option, was just currently they're speeding past schools. Thinking about ELKS, that top theme was more of a positive theme, indicating that that bridge option provides convenient access to Grand Forks, to more locations in Grand Forks. Top issue related to 32nd Avenue was the schools and concerns about kids walking and biking and mixing with traffic. So again, I try to both pay attention to these comments, but then not overly generalize given the small sample size. We know typically the people that comment are the ones that are most concerned, so it's good to know what those are and to hear those, but not necessarily to assume that that's representative of the broader themes. So let me pause there for questions or comments from any of you in terms of the summary or your perceptions or anything else you heard related to the open house.
I don't believe there are any, Tim. I guess the only thing to iterate is the statistics you saw on the website usage and stuff, views. That was just the forks2forksbridge.com website. Mm-hmm. We didn't try to track down how many views were on each city's Facebook pages of the videos or comments listed through there. So there's considerably more, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to get at than to what you just saw in the statistics we showed for our website.
Yeah, thank you, Earl. And certainly this era we've been in the last 18 months of doing more online has advantages and disadvantages. I would love to have done this meeting in person just because of that ability to communicate. That doesn't necessarily mean we would have gotten more, hundreds of people at a public open house is pretty unusual unless you're proposing something very specific and immediate. So that is a loss in terms of being able to have that interaction, but I think I feel confident that we got the word out and that a lot of people are following along, so that's positive. Okay, well, I'll come back in, as I mentioned, try to have time to check in with each one of you before we're done today, but why don't we move on to the traffic presentation, which Mike Konziolka will do. I may jump in here and there to provide some comments as well. So go ahead, Mike.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. All right. So I will be talking through the traffic operations analysis for the two bridge options. I think last time we met, we discussed the no-build traffic operations results. And so today we'll be looking at some of the results for both of the bridge options and then also some of the next steps after that. So Tim, if you could, next slide, thank you. So with this, we'll be looking at the 2030 and 2045 analysis years for each bridge option, and then we'll also go through the traffic control warrants analysis that was conducted after that. And then we have a look at some mitigation options for any of the locations that showed a potential issue in the future.
Hey, Mike, if I could just jump in already. One thing that as we've been presenting this information, and if you looked at it, you may have been scratching your head a little bit. I want to mention our next deliverable that we're producing is a direct comparison, really the evaluation that we compare the no build to the ELKS to 32nd in a nice sort of concise way. You can begin to pull that information out of this as you look at any given roadway and what's happening with traffic. So it's sort of here, but if you're wondering like, gee, I can't really see clearly what the summary is between ELKS versus 32nd, that is coming. Feel free to ask those questions, but just know that that's the next deliverable. And there's a lot of information in here, which is good. It's not necessarily the most easy to see, though Mike will do a good job presenting it, but just wanted to get that heads up. So go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah. All right, we can hop to the next page here. So this is kind of similar to what we looked at last time. There was volume comparison between the no build condition and the bridge condition. So we're looking at the 2030 traffic volumes here and really just saying what would the forecast traffic volumes be without a bridge, and then what would it be with the ELKS Drive bridge by 2030. So this is showing essentially all of the red, and the darker red are the reductions in traffic volumes that would be expected with the bridge, and then the blue is showing the increase in traffic volumes with the bridge. So we're going to see similar, if we want to go to the next one as well, Tim, similar conditions between 2030 and 2045. But in general, the ELKS bridge is going to remove or shift traffic away from Washington and 4th, and then bring it down towards the new bridge through 24th and 32nd, and kind of shift volumes from the north to the south here. And additionally, I guess what we're showing as well here is the daily traffic volumes. These numbers on here are the daily traffic volumes for the no build versus the build condition, and what that difference is. We can hop to the next. So part of this little summary here is just to show that for the bridge specifically, most of the traffic that would be anticipated to use the bridge would be using that, by the 2030 year. There's not substantial growth that would be expected between the 2030 and 2045 forecast years. We can move next. So next we're looking at the 32nd Avenue Bridge. This is comparing no build to the 32nd Avenue option for 2030. We're going to see similar takeaways compared to the ELKS Drive Bridge alternative. This one, of course, is bringing more traffic south, or I should say more to 32nd compared to the ELKS Drive option, whereas the ELKS Drive had a little bit more of a split between 24th and 32nd on the Grand Forks side of the bridge. But similar in terms of the volumes that are being shifted from Washington and 4th and from Bigland to the south section of the study area.
Lon, I just wanted to highlight that you do see lines that cross the river and represent a bridge location, but I want to make it clear that these lines by no means are a final line that show where the actual bridge alignment will be. It's, again, just a conceptual line showing you how we would connect 32nd over to Reinhardt, and there's a lot of wiggle room as to the exact alignment if and when we do come to construct a bridge at this site. 32nd Avenue is obviously a touchdown point on the North Dakota side. On the Minnesota side, we are purposely allowing it to land on Reinhardt Drive north and within their flood protection system. So that's why, another reason why there is that curve in the bridge. whereas on ELKS, it's more direct east-west connection. But again, I just wanted to make it clear that we're not identifying any final alignment at all. These alignments are generally following the work that was done on the hydraulic study that informed us that from a hydraulic point of view, a bridge across this cross-section of the flood protection system would have this impact, and we could mitigate to this level. So that's just a heads up onto these are not alignments to get overly worked up about from an individual property point of view.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important clarification. Thank you.
And Mike, I've got a quick question. The top number that you've got on here, those are the baseline numbers as of today, right? On each of the roads, like when you're coming across the Point Bridge, I see I think it says 11,380. That's the current baseline number, right?
That is the forecast traffic volume by 2030. So that's the no-build condition. So that's existing volumes grown out to 2030 without any changes in the traffic network, without any additional bridge.
Okay, got it.
Can you remind us, Mike, what the current rough today number is on that bridge? You know, you have 2030 is 11,380, but what is it at today? You know.
Yeah, I'd have to pull that up. I don't have it. I don't think that we have that summarized in our graphics here.
About 7,500. Okay, thank you.
That would be a 2018 count.
Cool.
Counted this spring.
What was that number again, Earl?
About 7,500.
Thank you.
Thank you, Earl.
We don't have to look it up. We can just ask Earl.
So, and that, you know, I was going to bring up this point later, and I probably can if you want to keep going. But, you know, I've asked several questions about projections, and Earl, you provided some information on where to look for that. And I appreciate that, and I dug into it a little bit. They're still kind of vague for me, because, I mean, that's a 50% increase. And I'd like to dig into the numbers on how that's arrived at, because everything hinges off of this. And like any formula, garbage in is garbage out. You know, the 2010 to 2020 census increase between the two cities is roughly 11%, a touch over 11.3 by my math. How do we get to a 2030 increase of 50% of cars over that bridge? I'm just curious. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just curious on how the model gets to that. That's a big disparity in my mind. And I know that that's getting into the weeds, and if we don't need to address that now, that's fine.
No, we tried to spend some time on your second meeting to go over how that is derived at.
And there were some, I'm interested in specifics, not because the model says. I want to know how the model gets there. Sure. And that can be an offline discussion.
Yeah, Eric, if this would help, or if maybe it's not the right venue, but we could certainly spend some time going through that offline, because I think my answer, which is, you know, accepted methodology and done by ATAC the way a number of other agencies do it, that's sort of the short answer, but I think you're asking a question that wants to open that up a little bit more.
Sure, yeah, and that's, like I said, that's something, just for my curiosity's sake, because the model says so, is not a good enough answer. For me, I want to see the methodology a little bit more.
Sure. And I guess the question would be for the rest of the group, if we went into the weeds to that detail, is it just one-on-one with Eric, or is it 1-on-11 with the whole group getting the full? That would add another meeting to the schedule and timeline and your commitment, but it's something we can, and I don't know if it'd be a full hour-and-a-half meeting, perhaps.
It doesn't have to be a full meeting. If there's people that just want to attend, then I'd be open to attending that as well, but you don't need to require everyone to come to that.
Another option I guess we could do is we could try to do a video information on it give that to you to see if that answers enough of your questions and follow up with more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say generally to all of you, you know, as your role, at least as we hope it is, being on this committee, that it's both to, you know, ask us hard questions and then understand what we're sharing, and then have confidence in it so that you can share it with others. And so if you do have questions like Eric is raising, I think we want to make sure you're comfortable with that, because you're part of the communication sequence here. So yeah, we'll find a way to try to open that up a little bit more for you as a group, as you're interested.
We had one more question. Yeah, Andrew.
So, like when I look at this in both scenarios, right? Like whether we're looking at the 10-year or the 25-year or the ELKS or the 32nd, like it seems like in both cases they're hovering around about half of the auto traffic is on the Point Bridge and about half is on the South Neighborhood Bridge. Is that a fair characterization?
That's a good point.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Again, if you go back to your second meeting, we talked about, you know, the commute pattern. We talked about the streetlight data that we have that shows origin destination. So again, I think we have a good sense that the model is getting people to the right areas according to what past has told us where people are coming and going to. But we will do a video to try to explain the full method of how these models are saying by 2030 X volume on this segment of roadway. We'll get into it a little bit at the end because it's tied to the land use plans, and so we'll get to it a little bit at the end, but we'll do that other video as well.
Okay. All right. Okay, why don't you keep going, Mike?
Okay. I guess hopping back into this, we can hop over to the 2045 as well. This is showing similar, just looking at general trends. Again, similar to 2030, more traffic pulled down towards the south from the north, and reaching specifically on the 32nd bridge around 8,200 vehicles. And I guess these are pretty similar between the two. If we go to the next slide, it's again comparing, just looking at this, again, we're expecting based on the forecasts that most of the traffic using the bridge would be using it by that first forecast year by 2030, with minimal increase between the horizon 2045 year compared to 2030, where most traffic within the first period here. So looking at the results of the analysis a little bit here, the map on the left here is just pointing out the intersections that are expected to have issues with the stars, yellow being starting to approach capacity, starting to experience operational issues, and then the red being failing operations, experiencing significant congestion during the peak hours. So, and then this table at the right is just indicating the actual level of service grade as well. So just looking through where some of our problem intersections are, and again, this is the 2030 ELKS Drive bridge scenario. We'll look at this and then also the 2045, but we start to have problems arising on Belmont. We have level service E on 4th and at 32nd, and then level service F at 24th and ELKS. We also have a few more level service F locations being on 32nd and Cherry. We have Greenway and Bigland, and then at Reinhardt and Bigland as well. And that one is shown slightly differently because there were two options evaluated here. There was the existing stop control. We also looked at the roundabout, given that it has been considered for an improvement by the 2030 analysis here. So the stop control option there would fail. The roundabout would operate at level service A. And we can move over to the 2045. We're going to see similar results here.
Mike, before we leave it, did you mention the segments?
No, I guess we can look at those as well. So we're looking both at the intersection operations as well as the segment operations. So the colored lines are showing the anticipated non-intersection roadway capacity and how the expected operations would be for each of those. So if you see any orange or red, that would be reaching or exceeding capacity, level service ERF. Anything less than that is considered acceptable and you're not experiencing significant delays or congestion. So in the 2030 Elks Drive Bridge, we have essentially no orange or red segments on the on either Grand Forks or East Grand Forks side. And that
page. So these F's and E's that we're seeing,
yes,
there's a way of clearing that up by changing the traffic signal at those intersections. Is that accurate or is that inaccurate?
That's a good clarification. So all of these that we're going to look at here are just the baseline analysis. So this is without any improvements or without any changes to traffic control or any changes in lanes that are provided. So this is the baseline that would be expected just with the change in volumes associated with each of the bridge alternatives.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, very good question. We would not leave them in this condition. Yep, okay.
Yep, and that's what the next part of this kind of starts to investigate. So moving over, I guess these are similar results. We just have a few more locations that move from level service E to level service F. If you want to hop between them, Tim, that might be helpful. Just to go back quick. So 4th and 32nd on Belmont both had level service E, and now 32nd is expected to increase by 2045 to level service F. And you may have seen Greenway and Bigland was at level service F in the 2030 condition. In 2045, it is no longer. That's because there's a programmed and planned improvement to install a signal at that location by 2045. So that resolves the operational issues at that intersection. And then going to the segments again, looking at those similar to what was expected by 2030, just with some additional yellow on Washington south of 32nd, but still everything expected to be operating within capacity between both of the years through 2045. So if there's we can talk through any questions on that. Otherwise, we can talk through 32nd and walk through questions after.
Sorry. I have a comment on, so as you're coming off Elks and doing a left turn on to Belmont, that's a slow turn, depending on the time of day, certainly. But then, so I do a left turn to go drop off, pick up my kids, and then you have to do a right turn on 24th, and that's within that block. So I just don't understand how that can be yellow, because if you're bridging 7,000 some cars, to me that's a huge bottleneck. You've got all this traffic coming, and they essentially have to stop for all the people trying to. I don't know. I think I strongly disagree on that.
No, I think what you're saying is accurate, and it's more reflective of the intersection operations than the roadway segment. So what you're saying is true, and that's what's shown. The delay that would be expected with that movement is showing up here in the models with the level service F at the intersections. So it is being represented. That roadway segment is more looking at from a daily capacity standpoint. Does the roadway have enough lanes to adequately service the daily volume? So it's kind of looking at these from different standpoints, but the peak hour operations at the intersections are showing significant delays at those locations.
that make sense, Tanya?
Yeah, I drive that every day. If you're trying to turn people left and get people from Belmont and then offload people's, it's a bottleneck anyway, and then that's a really tight space. But anyway.
No, that's a good point.
All right. We can look into the 32nd Avenue operations here. So looking at the 2030 forecast here at 32nd for the 32nd Avenue Bridge. A few different locations here that are expected to have failing or unacceptable operations in terms of traffic operations. 4th and Belmont still expected to operate at level service E in this option. Then we have on 32nd, both Cherry and Belmont would be at level service F, and then the same conditions over on the East Grand Forks side on Bigland at Reinhardt and Greenway, as was in the Elks Drive option. And then similarly on Washington, looking at the roadway, the road capacity in the segment analysis, similar conditions. We've got level service D on Washington between 24th and Demers, but no orange or red segments on this by 2030 with 32nd Avenue Bridge. Then if we move to 2045, you can see, just looking at those segments again, that same segment on Washington is expected to begin to reach capacity, approach or meet capacity, I should say, which would be level service E. So that's where you see the orange segment there. And then similarly, we have the yellow segment south of there on Washington as well. And looking at the changes in operations, the big change here is 4th and Belmont would be expected to fail by 2045, and then Washington and 32nd as well would be expected to reach level service E, which is reaching capacity, starting to experience significant delays. And then I think we can move to the next. Are there any questions specifically on that? Otherwise, we have a summary kind of looking at all three, or I should say, the two bridge options side by side with the no build option.
So I do have another question. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, because there's a good chance that I might be here. On this page, the star that's in East Grand Forks, the Bigland and Reinhardt, we might guess. So is that there? Because it continues to remain there, which to me sounds like we're not eliminating enough traffic flowing in that direction from East Grand Forks into Grand Forks and using the new bridge. Is that just because the signal what's already at that intersection is not efficient and will not still not be efficient? Or are we really not solving the problem we're looking to solve? You know what I'm saying?
No, I do understand it. And so I guess there's kind of two pieces to this. On the East Grand Forks, that is the Bigland and Reinhardt, and the reason for the two different, or I guess the reason that this is shown differently is because it was evaluated as the existing stop control and also evaluated as a roundabout. And the roundabout would process traffic efficiently and operate level service A or B. The existing stop control would operate at level of service F. So there's kind of two pieces. That's looking at it just as the existing condition, but not with any type of change or improvement. So that's why it shows up in all of these options, is it's just keeping that same stop control condition.
And Mike, I know you're about to flip to the comparison, but I think, let me try to capture your question, which was, are we having issues at that intersection under the no build? And I think the answer is yes.
No,
the answer is yes.
Kind of the question, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the actual question is, when you look at the residential area to the south of that, right, is it not enough of that residential area going south now with the new bridge and utilizing the new bridge? That's really the question.
I think it's kind of a bigger picture, I guess, and less isolated to the specific neighborhood south of here. It's kind of more of a regional shift. There's volumes coming from 220 and from the north as well. Yeah, this is kind of a summary. So there are volumes coming through here. I think it's more reflective of the fact that the side street stop control on Reinhardt under any condition wouldn't be sufficient for 2030 or 2045 volumes.
Got it. Okay.
And I guess maybe looking at where this intersection is in relation to the existing bridge versus, I guess this is 32nd. I mean, just making this up geographically, but the question is the new bridge going to pull trips from here to the south rather than to the north? Obviously, it depends on where they're going, but it's sort of somewhat equidistant, so I guess we wouldn't necessarily expect them to all peel off and go the other way, right? Okay. Get back to where we were. So how about this?
Perfect. All right, and so this is just kind of a comparison table. This is looking at the 2045 condition and then also adding in the no build condition, which we went through in the prior meeting, but just a side-by-side comparison looking at the three options and what would be expected by 2045 with any of them. So some similarities, I guess some of the main points are there are expected issues in any case at some of the intersections on 32nd at Cherry and Belmont, and then Belmont and 4th as well. And like we were saying, the Bigland and Reinhardt intersection with the existing stop control, all of those locations would be expected to have failing operations no matter which option, either no bridge or either of the bridge options went forward. Any questions on this specifically and what we're showing here?
I guess I've got a question, and I'm trying to think of how to say this because I realize it might be a little like, I don't know, heterodox here, but as I was looking through this and looking back at the survey responses, right, from the public input session, right, and when there were quite a few people that mentioned, like, I think it was safety, right, or like the school children going back and forth. And so I guess my question is, in those contexts, when we're talking about like school specifically, is level of service really the right metric to be using? And I understand like why it's being used, right? Like it's universal, it applies all over, you can grade intersections or road segments. But if level of service is measuring like the traffic flow and like how predictable and free flowing the traffic is, well, that's not really the question that people are talking about, at least when it comes to the school context.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, absolutely. I guess I'll chime in quick, Tim, and then I know that you got some thoughts, but absolutely, level of service is not everything. It is specifically tied to the traffic operations and mobility, and that's just one component of this, really. We have the safety component is something that's kind of somewhat separate from the operations, but it's just as important in the overall evaluation of the different options here. So it's level of service, I guess, isn't all encompassing. It's specific to the traffic operations and flow, and safety is kind of a separate component of the analysis and consideration. And Tim, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I agree with what Mike said. Just I guess the other way that we think about it from the planning perspective is, you know, what is a street for? What is a residential street for versus what is a collector or arterial as we get to be a larger street? how much traffic should it carry? What is the speed? How is it designed? So if we look at, with a bridge in this case and how it redistributes traffic, if the street now, has 100 cars a day and then that goes up to 200 and say that's near a school, first reaction is like, well, that's bad. It's a school. We don't want more traffic going by the school, which, if I were a parent or a neighbor, I might have that same reaction. The way we're going to look at that is that street designed to carry that traffic, which is part of this analysis level of service. Is it designed safely? And then at that intersection where you kind of get that interaction for sure of like kids crossing, how is that intersection designed? And you'll see it for this study when we talk about intersections, and Mike will get to this in a couple of slides. We're not designing the future intersection that might go with bridge as part of this study. We're calling out specifically if it's adjacent to a school, acknowledging that at that location, it needs a closer look for, potential traffic calming or additional safety measures. So I hope it doesn't seem like I'm moving past your question, because I'm really not. So there is more than one question. The question about, the level of service and the traffic performance. But the answer to, is it safe, is it appropriate for the context, those are all sort of built in ultimately to the design. So does that help at all or prompt other questions?
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Mike?
Sure. I think we can look at the next slide here.
I was just going to summarize this again when I made my caveat that we're not doing a great job and intentionally not trying to set up a comparison of the different options. But if you look at this and just count the number of intersections with the color, no build, you see 5, ELKS, you see 6, 32nd, you see 5. That's a little bit oversimplified, but how many intersections need to be fixed with each option? Essentially the same, whether you do something or you don't. They're not all the same intersections, and it's not all the same solution that might have to happen. But I think that is a good way just to recap sort of how the bridge fits into existing and future traffic flows, that the community is growing. There's increased traffic in a number of locations. So at this level, that's one of the many comparisons that we'll do in the next piece of work. I just wanted to pull that out.
Yep. Great. And so this, I guess, looking at the first piece that we just discussed was identifying locations that would be expected to have operational issues. And then the next part of that is then starting to look at options for fixing those issue locations. And one of the things that we do in that analysis is look at warrants to change the traffic control type. So if it's an existing stop control intersection, there are options, and there's a methodology to evaluate if a traffic signal is warranted at that location based on a number of criteria, but mostly looking at volume conditions. And then there's also consideration to change if you're going from a side street stop. There are always stop control warrants to incrementally build up the control at the intersection. So this table is just summarizing that warrants analysis and summarizing for each intersection under the no-build, ELKS, and 32nd bridge options. For each of those issue locations, what warrants would be met based on the 2045 projected traffic volumes. So essentially, we're looking at both the signal or an always stop control warrant being met most everywhere except for a few locations, which are 32nd Ave and Cherry under the no-build, 4th and Belmont under the ELKS bridge, and also under the 32nd Avenue bridge. and I guess an important note to all of this is that roundabouts don't have specific warrants. There's not a process to specifically evaluate criteria to say that a roundabout is warranted or isn't. So those are in consideration for an improvement at all locations if there is a potential improvement to both safety or traffic operations or delay.
Yeah, so roundabouts are an alternative solution, just not called out in that same process.
Right.
Yeah.
Section that's not on here because it's already programmed to have a signal by this time, right?
Yep, that's accurate. All right. So the next piece of this, after identifying what were kind of the options for improving an intersection, is looking at what are the different options and what would be required in order to bring the intersection up to an acceptable level of service. So get to that level of service D or better. So we went through kind of the step-by-step process, trying to incrementally increase in terms of cost, looking at the different options. So the first option, add turn lanes without changing the control. The next would be convert to an always stop with the minimum amount of turn lanes. This is assuming that the initial condition was a side street stop. And then the next would be go to a higher form of traffic control, which would be a signal. And then again, looking at incrementally adding the minimum amount of turn lanes needed to reach acceptable operations. And then finally a roundabout, which is the highest cost option, but that was the next on the list or the hierarchy here. And just to note that there are additional considerations that can kind of change the priorities if there's a location with an identified crash issue or with schools nearby, which where it's not as simple as just looking at these. There are the safety considerations where some of these that may be lower cost may not be adequate for those locations. So this all culminates into this next table, summarizing the mitigation options. So again, each intersection that had an identified issue is shown here, and I know there's a lot here, so I'll try to break it down a little bit here. But for each alternative, we're going through and showing what's the existing type of traffic control, and what was the level of service in 2030 or 2045. And then again, providing, this is what we looked at in the warrants table, what are the options for a solution at this location? And then in the next two, this is where we're just identifying locations that have a school adjacent where there needs to be additional consideration for pedestrian crossings and safety. And then also locations where the safety analysis in the prior analysis showed there's an existing safety or crash issue. And so with that, this furthest right column kind of summarizes every option for a potential fix to the location that would result in a level service D or better. So would effectively improve the intersection. So I know that's a lot. Is there any questions on specifically what's shown in this table, or can I clarify?
Did you guys look at any other parts of the roadway, and specifically 32nd Avenue? I noticed you guys spent a significant amount of time on intersections, but the school district has schools adjacent to 32nd Avenue between the intersection of Cherry and 32nd all the way up to, I believe it's 10th. Was that section of roadway also evaluated as part of this, I guess, study that you guys have worked on so far? Because we have a lot of pedestrian traffic that likes to use that as a crosswalk.
Right. And that would be one of these locations that would be called out as school adjacent. So the traffic analysis did look at the roadway segments there, they were included in the model. The specific driveway locations were not analyzed as part of this kind of higher level planning study. Those, of course, are specific consideration, but this is looking, we looked at operations on the roadway and at the intersections adjacent, and then in terms of looking at what would be an acceptable solution for those locations, that's where we kind of flagged these school locations where pedestrian crossings are definitely an important factor in what should be considered here.
We would like to see more study on that 32nd corridor, though, specifically between that and how we would address mitigation for those pedestrians that are utilizing that corridor as a crosswalk. I think I'm trying to drill down to as we have kids crossing not at intersections, and how we would safely mitigate that and address that, because I understand that to be a very, very large concern from both of those communities.
Absolutely.
And that's coming from Chris, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could just jump in on schools. I was saying to Earl earlier today, from the first time we started working on this study and started to get to know the issues, that schools issue came up immediately and hasn't stopped. So that's been sort of in our minds, and it was one of the reasons, even on this table on the screen, which otherwise might not have a call out for schools, we wanted to make sure to highlight that, because it is both a need and an opportunity. I do want to acknowledge on the schools issue that from all the data that we've seen, on one hand, the technical data doesn't show, fortunately, any elevated incidents of crashes happening around the schools in this area. That doesn't mean there aren't close calls, et cetera, that aren't reported. And I know there's a lot of other work being done, at least periodically, on schools, whether it's the safe routes to schools work, or the sort of bike walk survey that the schools are doing, or kind of site-specific crossing patrols. So I don't know if that helps, Chris, but I guess for the purpose of this study, I want to make sure to understand that and realize that with a bridge and additional traffic, that sort of causes us, it heightens the attention to those issues around schools. On the other hand, without a bridge, as we've seen in some of these tables, that issues still exist. So as much as I would like for us, for example, to be, designing these intersections right now in terms of the study, or diving into a specific, more detailed look at, say, 32nd or even 4th and Belmont, we're not able to do that as part of the study, and I do try to keep us pulling back up to the bigger question of, new bridge, not new bridge, or ELKS versus 32nd. But I acknowledge, in order to have comfort with any of those options, you have to have comfort that the details are going to make sense. So there's a little bit of for the purpose of the study, a little bit of a trust us that if it goes forward, we've identified where the issues are, and there's a subsequent step to do that further design. So I guess I'm both saying I hear you, and then also there's a limit to how much we'll do on this study. Any response or other thoughts, Chris?
No, I just, again, I can't foot stomp it enough that we really do need to look at that corridor between 10th and Cherry as part of that piece. No matter what the outcome is here, to your point, Tim, we are going to see such an incredible increase of traffic through that area. It's foolish to not think that these kids are going to continue to try to cross this path that we allow parking on, that we have 4 lanes of vehicles going across. We're kind of setting ourselves up for something bad to happen there. And I just think that would be I guess it'd be foolish not to somehow incorporate that to make sure that we address that.
Yeah, maybe again, jumping ahead, that if this, depending on where the study concludes, that there is a caveat or condition, whether that comes from the study itself or from others, that, you know, certain more study or, you know, what we'd call mitigation needs to be considered, even if it's beyond what that level that we're going to here. Okay, let's move on in the interest of time. Mike, I'm not sure where you were on this slide here.
I think we covered this and can look at the next one here and start to get into assumed. So this next piece is kind of one of the last pieces, but this is, for the purposes of this study, we need to assess, you know, there's kind of the universe of options for mitigation on that prior table in the last column, and then we need to hone in on a specific one just for the purposes of assessing a cost for each of the options, to look at these globally. What would the cost of one of these alternatives be in order to bring everything to an acceptable level in terms of traffic operations? So this table summarizes the assumed mitigation option for the purposes of that cost estimate, and this details kind of the specific mitigation that would be required. And this is, again, following that same hierarchy of steps for mitigation that we went through 2 slides ago. But so each of these, I guess, without getting into every note or every specific turn lane required, we go through and we talk about what would be the assumed traffic control for the cost estimate, what would that result in terms of level of service, and then kind of discuss what would be the potential considerations for this. Would there be right-of-way impacted? Would there be additional considerations needed? So that's kind of this pedestrian accommodations needed. This is called out, and this kind of touches back on that last comment. Some of these aren't just cut and dry, and really none of these, where we have specific locations where we have high pedestrian crossings, additional considerations should be taken to accommodate those crossings at these locations. So I guess the one note here, you'll still see level service ED at Demers and Washington under the no build. This specifically is and this intersection has been studied quite a bit in the past as well. Very limited right-of-way, very limited in terms of mitigation options. That intersection is quite built out in terms of dual turn lanes, dedicated right turn, channelized turns, and the number of lanes. So there are few feasible options in terms of increasing capacity at that intersection. So this is one that was, any mitigation called out here would likely be infeasible due to the lack of right-of-way here. So that's the reason this one is not brought down to a level of service D or better for both peaks, and the others are.
And one thing to emphasize there is that this is with the that it's still improved over the no build option.
Right.
For what that's worth. Okay, getting close to time. I know you got one more. Oh no, I thought you had one more table. Why don't I take this summary? I guess, Mike, were you done on the previous one?
Yeah, feel free.
So again, I do and I don't apologize. This has been more of the technical under the hood presentation. The next one will do a better job of comparing and contrasting, but I think trying to back up a minute from intersections to the bigger picture of the bridge study, these bullets just show what we see is with either of the sort of the build, the bridge ELKS or 30-second scenarios, we do see that more balanced distribution of traffic on the system, which is not surprising and was one of the main sort of purposes. And so although there is redistribution and there is future growth, it's not oriented just toward one neighborhood, but is more spread across the cities. Second point, as we saw in the tables, but just to recap, without the bridges, some of these key intersections that we've been focused on all along Belmont and Fourth and Demers and Washington still require significant improvements. So even if we say, well, with the bridge, we need to add a turn lane at one of those intersections, yes. However, without a bridge, there's something similar or probably more significant that would be required, again, to sort of mitigate to the same level. With Washington Street, especially up north toward Demers, performance on that is poor today and getting worse. The bridges do bring that down. So again, from that redistributing the trips, there's so much traffic concentrated today in Washington, and really not a way to build our way out of that. And then on 32nd Avenue, again, we know there will be increased traffic. It's not the same for the no build and the two builds, but it's coming either way. And so again, as we think about intersections, and probably Chris, even to your point about kids crossing, mid-block, which is a concern, that doesn't necessarily come just with the bridge. It's probably there today, and we know it will be there in the future. And I guess the upside of that is, as we think about solutions, they're sort of the same regardless of whether we do something or don't do anything. Not 100% the same, but we know the locations, we know the corridors either way. So I think if we, on the one hand, there's, as part of the study, trying to shed light, and if we can get to some conclusions about what's the best solution related to a bridge, we can do that. At the same time, hopefully this helps just advance that thinking about what do we need to do regardless. So I do want to stop and ask for some input, but we have a couple more slides here. I think we won't have quite as much time for my round robin, but maybe it'll be more of a lightning round. Let me turn it over to Earl to talk about land use plan.
This is just a slide to get back to how we do forecasts. Those are primarily utilizing what each city is saying their future growth plans are. And as we've told you, both cities are updating their land use plans. East Grand Forks is ahead of Grand Forks schedule-wise, and so you'll see that they have a draft document that's out for review and comment. It's not final by any means, so it is subject to change. The one thing for this study group to be aware of, that the East Grand Forks land use plan really doesn't have a lot of changes that are real specific to this bridge question. There are changes, but there's not a big, massive change happening on the East Grand Forks side in their land use plan. So it won't have much of an effect on our traffic forecast for this bridge study. On the Grand Forks side, we're further behind on where we're at compared to East Grand Forks. The one thing that would alert you as to, on the Grand Forks side, is we are talking about doing a higher annual growth rate of population growth than what we have in our current plans. So simply more people will mean more trips. And depending on where they're located, where the city plans on putting them in, whether the south to the west of the interstate, that'll have a more impact on the use of these bridges. So on the East Grand Forks side, the land use plan draft is out there for comment. For this study, it doesn't have a lot of substantial impact to it. On the Grand Forks one, it's behind schedule, but we are talking about more people than we currently have been talking about coming to the city of Grand Forks in the future. More people will be more trips. The key is where they're going to be located at, and this is the opportunity for your input into that planning process to help us figure out where to put those people. And that simply is what this slide is meant to do.
Okay, questions on that one before I come around and pick on people? I would love to just go around and ask for any further comments, either what you heard today or sort of where the study's going or what you might be hearing elsewhere. And I'm just going to start with people we didn't hear from and maybe start with the council and ask Brian Larson comments or questions at this point.
Yeah, I can go ahead and go first. Some of my initial thoughts from looking at the report and that data, I was kind of initially disappointed that, that a bridge in either location doesn't solve all the problems. And, when I thought about it more, that became obvious. We're behind on building this bridge, and the no build option is significantly worse. So what I think is really important here is to look closely at the options available, and for this group to recommend to our community leaders and our elected officials the most logical location, the bridge that most benefits the entire community, and then work hard together, both communities, to put our best effort forward to finally get the bridge built.
Thank you, Brian. Sticking with the council, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo some of those things. Looking at specifically at Belmont and how it reacts to both bridges and then how that traffic disperses, I found it interesting that there was some decreases on traffic along Cherry and things like that, I think that I just need to understand a little bit more about how you get there. And then the discussion on roundabouts and circles and how that could potentially affect and how traffic as it's coming over the bridge and trying to integrate when you've got those tight zones around 24th where there's lots of traffic plus people needing to cross Belmont and not necessarily having a turn lane. I'm just curious to know more, I guess. Will we be able to get to the point where we can look at things beyond just stop signs or a signal, and is there a greater impact of how that traffic actually interacts rather than just the flow down the street, I guess? That's probably just questions for future.
Sure, yeah. And I'll just, I'm tempted to dive deep into roundabouts, but the short answer again, for any specific intersection, we're not going to identify a solution that says, put in a signal or put in a roundabout. We are identifying those possible options, and roundabouts are possible in a lot of locations. And it really comes down to that specific intersection, fit, design, function. They can be used almost anywhere. Some would say near a school is with pedestrian traffic is a terrible idea. In other applications, you could find a good solution. So they are amazing tools if used in the right way, in the right place, and unfortunately those specifics will come in the future. Thank you for those. Let's see, I'm also going to move on to others we haven't heard from in no particular order. Dave Zaverl?
Stepped out.
Stepped out, okay. How about Josh Brown?
I guess I was the one that was asking questions regarding the intersections. I guess to me, there's no extra comments at this point.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't connecting all the faces with names. And how about Tim Brooks?
I got no comments at this time. So.
Okay. Appreciate that. And Craig Wall?
Yeah, I guess I can just say I really appreciate this summary slide at the end. You gave a lot of data, a lot of level of services, and you could see that there was always problems at all these intersections, but this last summary slide just kind of saying that, under all three scenarios, we still have issues really helps. And furthermore, I'd like to just say, add on to what Chris was saying. I think that all these intersections and identifying them and as certain level of services and different mitigation strategies are great, but I think there's so much more mitigation that has to happen throughout the whole corridor, which again might be beyond the scope of this study, but that's something that I think was a very large concern to most people reading the comments on those websites too. So I'd just like to echo that point.
Sure, appreciate that, Craig. How about Zach?
Yeah, I guess I just want to touch, I think Brian mentioned it too as well. I think it's, the hard part about this whole study is I think we're years beyond when it would have made a major impact for the levels of service on some of these areas. And no matter what we do, even a no build is making a bad situation in a lot of spots even worse. You can't go any lower than an F. So I think that's part of the problem in some of these areas. We're not noticing it. Some of these neighborhoods, you can't go any lower than that. One thing I will encourage, I guess, is without a decision to move forward, it's hard for you guys to put more analysis into some of these intersections for concerns we have for pedestrians crossing and all those type of areas. I think there's ways to make those levels of service or pedestrian crossings safe for all students. I think but it's hard for us to, or you even to come up with, this is the solution for that until we come up with what option is best. So I continue to move forward and encourage everybody to come up with a solution that you guys can take and the city can take to try to make progress and get this thing to work. So thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, what I'll interpret as extension of trust, which I realize is what's required, because the details do matter, and we unfortunately can't sort of design all those as part of the study. Moving on to Andrew Budke.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has already been said before, but I know my mind jumps ahead right away to kind of some of the streetscape design. I feel like that's kind of what we're tiptoeing around here. I know our big question with this group is like where, right? But I guess I just want to reiterate, a lot of the people that live in these neighborhoods or have school children that attend the schools, they're kind of already thinking ahead to not so much level of service and how much traffic volume is going through, but like the speed at which they're moving through and how dangerous that may or may not be. So like Chris's comment, right? I mean, you didn't say this. I am imagining 32nd, right, is already a very wide road. It's frankly probably too wide, right? So that's counter to the level of service calculation probably, but that might be what's needed to get everybody on board. So, thank you.
Appreciate that. We do have some time left. No one has gotten up and given a very long speech, so that helps us get through. So I'm glad to come back around to others who did speak, and I'll start with Tanya and then ask Eric. Any other thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I just concur with, we are behind on the bridge, and it is definitely needed for the greater good, and I think a lot of people can get behind that. At the same time, when it's your house and your neighborhood, it does dramatically change. It gets real personal real fast. Yeah, and I think we're kind of tiptoeing, and maybe that's not the scope of this study, but there's a lot of people within our neighborhood that they're just like, I would never be able to get out of my driveway. And I understand property mitigation isn't part of this this study or this conversation, but those are the real questions being asked. And then I would just offer anybody that wants to come to my house 7:30 to 9 a.m., I'll make you a cup of coffee and have you try to take a left turn and a right turn. You have to gun it to get out, and then you have to slam on your brakes to take a right turn. So on the one, as I read it, it was 2 signaled intersections there. And, sometimes when you do a study, and you all are very smart people, this has been carefully cultivated, but sometimes the real world of actually driving it, I would just encourage anybody to come during those times and give it a go. I just don't see how that segment is going to support. It's literally 3 houses, 3 yards from that turn to the next one. My son can sometimes run it when he wants to walk faster than I can drive it, and then he pushes that little signal to cross. And then there's that signal to cross too, which would randomly be going. So anyway, great work. Thank you so much for all the effort thus far.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate the comments. And my response on your last one probably is just answering it with another technical question. But as you get to 2 traffic signals close together, between ELKS 24th, if that's what is there. You know, they are going to be timed so that there's a flow there. That's different from saying we don't want to see that traffic, but in terms of making sure it works, there's sort of a technical answer to that, but I hear the non-technical part of your question as well, because that's reality. Eric, how about you? Anything else?
Sure, yeah. You know, I think the analysis that you guys have done is really good. I've enjoyed looking through it, and I think it becomes very clear that this needs to be addressed as, you know, kind of one big issue. Mitigation coming along with the bridge. You can't do one and not do the others, because it causes massive problems if you build it first and then figure it out later. It's got to be one discussion. Because if you can see, you know, the mitigation efforts, there are some plausible mitigation efforts in there. So I think that, you know, as this conversation goes further, it has to merge into one, not bridge then. It all needs to be one discussion. I think that's crystal clear. But you know, the efforts that you guys have done, the analysis is very good, and I've enjoyed looking at it.
Thank you. I'm going to try one more question in the last 2 minutes for any brave volunteers, but what voices haven't we heard today, or any points that maybe you're hearing from others or you think that we should be aware of?
I think Eric just said it, honestly.
And do you want to put that in your words, Tanya? Just needs to be one package or something different?
Yeah, I think it just needs to start to be one discussion. I think to the people being impacted by it, it feels a little bit the cart before the horse, or starting to feel like that rather. Yeah, so I think everyone concurs largely that a bridge is needed. I think at this point it's becoming very clear that, you know, and you have to understand this is, you know, not the boy who cried wolf, but we've had this bridge discussion going back 25 years, right? So even my husband's like, yeah, I'll believe it when, you know, so now it's starting to sound very real. And I think now people are engaging at a level that reflects that realness. And so I think if you want to get people on board and really make some progress, those are the discussions that need to start to happen. And again, people want to see it, right? Like some initial diagrams, and everybody understands those are drafts, but I think visually seeing how this might lay out or where the roundabouts is you know, we do architecture. We could explain what a building's going to look like and explain the concept, but once we bring our drafts and our plans and our videos, they're like, wow, we get it. So I think that's, if you're asking what's needed, I think these two guys have said it.
I think the
Sure, I appreciate that.
I think the PTOs from not only those two South End schools, but Viking, and then I think more importantly, Phoenix as well. These schools, and including a couple parochial schools, will be vastly impacted by this. And I think the only way that this bridge happens is if there is a common understanding from those parents. They have to live every day in these neighborhoods and get in and out of these buildings. So if, I mean, really you want to get to the root of the solution, that's where you start. We got to get back to those people that are using that area and actively involved in their school.
I appreciate that. And certainly one of my goals in leading this study is to sort of address both understanding and sort of reflecting back as much as we can this detail that you're all asking for and that people will want to see as much detail as possible in terms of what does this look like. And again, unfortunately, we're not designing that solution. But on the other hand, making sure that we help people see what the reality is in terms of what does it mean to add so many trips on the street? Does that, you know, make sure people are, if it's a real change and it's a concern, make sure people get that, or if it's a change that's not as significant a change, make sure people understand that. Because I certainly know from my own perspective, you know, initial reaction is the alarm bells start to go off, and sometimes when I get more information, I'm like, oh, I get that. So if there's an opportunity to have an, oh, I get that moment with people, I want to make sure we do that as well. And I appreciate all of you to the extent you're taking in what we're sharing and that it makes sense to you, that you do your best to communicate that when you have that opportunity as well. Well, we're at 2 o'clock or a couple minutes over, so I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Earl. Thank you, everyone.
And I'll just be quiet enough to say thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.